I never imagined that returning from a 2-month business trip would lead to one of the most bizarre confrontations of my life, yet there it was. An elegant cream-colored envelope addressed to the Wilkins-Peterson wedding party, with my home listed as the venue, dated just 3 weeks away. At first I thought it was a simple mail delivery error, but the address was unmistakably mine. The historic Victorian farmhouse I'd inherited from my grandfather last year. I stood in my driveway, suitcase still in the car, mail clutched in my hand, as confusion quickly morphed into disbelief, and disbelief into simmering anger. My name is Daniel Harrington, a 36-year-old restoration architect who had spent the last 8 weeks in Boston overseeing a major historical renovation project. The house, an imposing 3-story Victorian with wraparound porches and 5 acres of meticulously designed gardens, had been in my family for generations. My grandfather, Thomas Harrington, had been something of a local legend in our town of Meadowbrook. A renowned botanist and conservationist, he'd transformed the property into a living showcase of native plants and rare flowering species. When he'd passed away 18 months ago, I'd taken a sabbatical from my firm to honor his legacy by restoring both the house and gardens to their former glory. The confusion deepened when I unlocked my front door and found a business card on the entryway table from Lakeside Events with a handwritten note. Confirmed site visit, tent placement marked with stakes in back garden. I dropped my luggage and rushed through the house to the back doors. Sure enough, small white flags dotted my grandmother's prized rose garden, marking what appeared to be the outline for a massive event tent. Wooden stakes with white ribbons created a makeshift aisle leading to the century-old gazebo that my grandfather had built by hand for my grandmother's 50th birthday. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the card, barely containing my growing outrage. After 2 rings, a cheerful voice answered, "Lakeside Events, this is Melanie speaking." I introduced myself as the owner of the property on Willow Creek Road, explaining that there seemed to be some mistake regarding an upcoming wedding. "Oh, you must be calling about the Wilkins-Peterson wedding," she responded brightly. "Everything's on schedule. The tent company is delivering next Thursday, and we've already coordinated with the florist for the gazebo arrangements." "There's been a misunderstanding," I said as calmly as possible. "I never authorized my property to be used for any wedding. I've been away on business for 2 months. There was a long pause before Melanie's voice returned, noticeably less cheerful. "Sir, we have a signed contract with the Meadowbrook Heritage Association for the use of the Harrington State. All payments have been processed, and we have over 150 guests confirmed to attend." I felt my blood pressure rising as I asked her to email me a copy of this supposed contract immediately. Ending the call, I noticed a large binder sitting conspicuously on my kitchen counter, another item that hadn't been there when I left. The cover read, "Wilkins-Peterson Wedding, April 28th, in elegant script. I flipped it open to find detailed plans for transforming my property into an upscale wedding venue. Seating charts, catering arrangements, even a timeline specifying when the wedding party would have access to my home for preparation and photographs. Within minutes, Melanie's email arrived with the attached contract. The document looked official enough, complete with the Meadowbrook Heritage Association letterhead and the signature of its president, Victoria Cunningham. The contract granted permission to use the historic Harrington Estate Gardens and gazebo for the Wilkins-Peterson nuptials at a rental fee of $8,000. What was most disturbing, however, was the signature at the bottom. Supposedly mine, but it was an obvious forgery, not even remotely resembling my handwriting. Victoria Cunningham. The name instantly triggered a memory of an uncomfortable encounter shortly after I'd inherited the property. A well-dressed woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and an air of untouchable authority had appeared on my doorstep, introducing herself as the president of both the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association and the Heritage Association. She'd presented me with a thick folder of community guidelines and historic preservation requirements, insisting they applied to my property. I'd politely but firmly informed her that my grandfather's estate was not part of the HOA's jurisdiction, as it predated the development by over 70 years and had specifically been excluded from their oversight. Victoria had smiled thinly, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she waved away my objections. "The historic nature of your property makes it subject to Heritage Association guidelines regardless of HOA membership," she'd claimed. I had done my research before moving in and knew this was completely false. When I'd produced the legal documents confirming the property's independent status, Her pleasant demeanor had quickly cooled. "You'll find that maintaining such a large historic property without community support can be challenging," she'd said as she left, the implicit threat hanging in the air between us. Now it seemed Victoria had moved beyond threats to outright fraud. I called my family's longtime attorney, Martin Winters, whose firm had handled my grandfather's estate. After explaining the situation, I forwarded him the forged contract. "This is outrageous," Martin fumed over the phone. "The Heritage Association has absolutely no authority over your property, and Victoria Cunningham knows it. The forgery alone is grounds for criminal charges." "What about the wedding?" I asked. "It's scheduled for 3 weeks from now. These people have paid thousands of dollars in good faith, thinking everything was properly arranged." Martin's sigh was audible. That's the complicated part. The couple and their families are innocent victims here. They could potentially sue the Heritage Association for fraud, but that doesn't solve their immediate problem of needing a wedding venue. As for you, you have every right to refuse access to your property, but I'll look like the villain who ruined a young couple's wedding," I finished for him, "even though I'm the victim here." "Exactly. Victoria Cunningham is cunning, I'll give her that. She's placed you in an impossible position: either allow strangers to use your property without consent, or become the local pariah who destroyed a wedding. And she's collecting substantial fees either way." After hanging up, I walked through my gardens, trying to clear my head and formulate a plan. The property was truly magnificent, even after my long absence. Spring had arrived during my time away, and the gardens were exploding with color: azaleas, rhododendrons, and my grandfather's prized collection of rare tulips, all in spectacular bloom. I could understand why someone would want to be married here, but that didn't excuse the fraud and trespassing. As I rounded the ancient oak that marked the boundary between the formal gardens and the wilder woodland section of the property, I spotted an elderly man examining one of my grandfather's experimental rose hybrids. He looked up as I approached, a wide smile splitting his weathered face. "Welcome home, Mr. Harrington. I was beginning to think you'd extended your stay in Boston." I recognized Henry Wilson, my closest neighbor and my grandfather's friend of 40 years. His small cottage sat on the adjacent property, and he had been keeping an eye on things during my absence. "Hello, Henry. I'm glad to be back, though I've returned to quite a situation." I explained the wedding predicament, watching as Henry's expression shifted from surprise to indignation. "Victoria Cunningham," he spat the name like it tasted bad. "That woman has been trying to get her hooks into this property for years. Your grandfather rebuffed her at every turn." He shook his head, leaning on his walking stick. "Did you know she tried to have this place declared historically significant by the town council 5 years ago? Would have subjected it to all sorts of restrictions and oversight, her oversight naturally. Your grandfather presented evidence that her husband's development company had destroyed 3 actual historic buildings to create that gated community they live in. The hypocrisy was too much even for the council to swallow." This new information painted an even clearer picture of Victoria's long-standing designs on my property. "What do you think she's really after, Henry? The wedding fees can't be worth the risk of forgery charges." Henry snorted. "It's not about the money, though I'm sure she's skimming plenty off the top. It's about control. Your property is the crown jewel of Meadowbrook, 5 acres of prime land that she can't dictate terms for. This wedding scheme is just her foot in the door. Once she establishes that your property is part of her heritage program, she'll start imposing regulations, fees, mandatory improvements. Before you know it, you'll effectively lose control while still paying the taxes and maintenance costs." His assessment aligned with my growing suspicions. "So what would you do in my position?" Henry's eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief. "Your grandfather always said that when dealing with bullies, sometimes you have to speak their language, only louder." He tapped his walking stick thoughtfully against the ground. "Victoria is all about appearances and status. Her power comes from perception. Change that perception, and you change the power dynamic." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black SUV pulling into my driveway. A young couple emerged, the woman in designer sunglasses clutching a wedding planning binder identical to the one I'd found in my kitchen, the man checking his watch with an air of impatient importance. "The bride-to-be," I presumed. "Mr. Harrington?" she called as she approached, hand extended. "I'm Melissa Wilkins, and this is my fiancé, James Peterson. We're so excited about having our wedding here. Victoria told us you were away on business, but that everything was arranged. We just wanted to stop by and finalize a few details about the layout." I shook her hand automatically, noting the enormous diamond engagement ring that caught the afternoon sunlight. Ms. Wilkins, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I never authorized any wedding on my property. I only just learned about this today upon returning home. Melissa's perfectly made-up face froze, her smile remaining fixed, while her eyes widened in confusion. That's impossible. We signed the contract months ago. Victoria handled everything. James stepped forward, his expression darkening. We've paid $8,000 for this venue. The invitations are sent. We have guests coming from across the country. I understand your position, I said, as sympathetically as possible. But someone has misled you. I never signed any contract. In fact, the signature on your agreement is forged. My property is not part of the Heritage Association's program, nor is it available for public events. Melissa's composure crumbled slightly, her voice rising. This has to be a mistake. Our wedding is in 3 weeks. Victoria Cunningham personally guaranteed that this venue was secured. She's the president of the Heritage Association and the HOA. James put his arm around Melissa's shoulders, his tone shifting from angry to solicitous. Honey, let me handle this. He turned to me with the confident air of someone accustomed to making problems disappear. Mr. Harrington, there's clearly been a miscommunication. Why don't we discuss a reasonable compensation that would make this work for everyone? Money doesn't have to be an issue here. Before I could respond, another car pulled into the already crowded driveway, a silver Mercedes with vanity plates reading, Visa Com. Victoria Cunningham had arrived, as if summoned by our conversation. She emerged from her vehicle looking every inch the affluent community leader in a tailored navy pantsuit, her silver hair styled in an immaculate bob. Her smile remained fixed as she approached, though her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly when she spotted Henry standing beside me. Daniel, welcome home, she called with artificial warmth. I see you've met the happy couple. Isn't it wonderful that your beautiful property will host such a joyous occasion? The Heritage Association is so pleased to include the Harrington Estate in our Historic Venues program. That's interesting, Victoria, I replied evenly, especially since I never agreed to any such program, nor did I sign the contract you forged my name on. Victoria's smile didn't waver, though something cold flickered behind her eyes. Forged? What a serious accusation. There must be some confusion. Perhaps you forgot the agreement we discussed before your departure? She turned to Melissa and James. Administrative misunderstandings happen occasionally with our historic properties. Nothing to worry about. There's no misunderstanding, I stated firmly. I never signed any agreement, and my property is not part of your association. You've collected $8,000 under false pretenses. Victoria's mask of politeness slipped slightly as she stepped closer, lowering her voice. Be reasonable, Daniel. You don't want to be responsible for ruining this lovely couple's wedding. Think of how that would appear to the community. Your grandfather was always a team player when it came to town events. The invocation of my grandfather was the final straw. My grandfather rejected your attempts to control his property repeatedly, I said, loud enough for the couple to hear. And now you've resorted to forgery and fraud to get your way, Melissa gasped, looking between us with growing distress. Is this true? Did you forge a contract? James put a protective arm around her, his expression hardening as he stared at Victoria. We trusted you with our wedding day. We paid you directly, not some association account. Victoria's composure cracked further as she tried to regain control of the situation. These are absurd accusations. The Harrington Estate has been part of our heritage program for months. All the paperwork is in order. She turned to me, her voice hardening. This obstructionism will not reflect well on you, Daniel. The Meadowbrook community has certain standards and expectations. Your grandfather understood the importance of preservation and community access. Henry Wilson chuckled darkly beside me. Thomas Harrington told you to pound sand the last time you tried to claim authority over his property, Victoria. I was standing right there when he said it. Don't rewrite history for these nice young people. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of yet another vehicle, this time a town police cruiser. Officer Dave Mitchell stepped out, his expression carefully neutral as he approached our group. Afternoon, folks. Got a call about a possible trespassing situation at the Harrington place. Victoria immediately stepped forward, hand extended. Officer Mitchell, thank you for responding so quickly. There's been a misunderstanding with Mr. Harrington about the scheduled events on his property. I intercepted before she could spin her narrative. Actually, officer, I called about unauthorized access to my property during my absence. Someone has been entering my home, placing stakes in my garden, and forging my signature on contracts without my knowledge or permission. Officer Mitchell looked between us, clearly uncomfortable being caught in what appeared to be a neighborhood dispute. Do you have documentation of these claims, Mr. Harrington? I produced my phone, showing him the contract with the obviously forged signature, then led everyone into the house, where the wedding binder sat on my kitchen counter, clear evidence someone had been inside my home without authorization. I've been in Boston for 2 months on business. I returned today to find wedding preparations underway on my property that is not part of the HOA or Heritage Association's jurisdiction. Victoria attempted to interject, but Officer Mitchell raised a hand to silence her. Ms. Cunningham, these are serious allegations. Forgery and unauthorized entry are criminal matters. This is ridiculous, Victoria scoffed, though her confident demeanor was crumbling. The Heritage Association has legitimate authority over historically significant properties in Meadowbrook. Actually, I countered, I have documentation proving otherwise. I retrieved a folder from my office, the same documents I'd shown Victoria during our first encounter, plus additional research my attorney had compiled. My property is explicitly excluded from both HOA and Heritage Association oversight, as confirmed by town records and the original property deeds. As Officer Mitchell reviewed the documents, Melissa Wilkins burst into tears. Our wedding is ruined. What are we supposed to do now? James pulled her close, his earlier confidence replaced with genuine concern. Despite my anger at the situation, I couldn't help feeling sympathy for the couple. They were collateral damage in Victoria's power play. While Officer Mitchell continued questioning Victoria about the forged contract, I pulled James and Melissa aside. Look, this isn't your fault. You've been misled by someone you trusted. If you give me a day or two, I might be able to help you find an alternative venue. James looked skeptical but nodded, leading his distraught fiancée back to their vehicle, as Officer Mitchell requested that Victoria accompany him to the station to answer further questions. As they departed, an idea began forming in my mind, one that would address both the immediate wedding crisis and Victoria Cunningham's ongoing attempts to control my property. Henry Wilson chuckled as he watched the procession of departing vehicles. I can practically see the wheels turning in your head, Daniel. Your grandfather got that same look when he was plotting something particularly clever. I smiled, the outline of a plan taking shape. Victoria put me in an impossible position. Either allow the wedding and tacitly accept her authority over my property, or refuse and become the villain who destroyed a young couple's special day. So what are you thinking? Henry asked. I'm thinking it's time to change the rules of the game entirely, I replied, and I'm going to need your help, along with a few specific phone calls. Over the next 48 hours, I set my plan in motion. First, I contacted Martin Winters to file formal complaints against Victoria Cunningham and the Heritage Association for forgery, fraud, and trespassing. Then I reached out to Melissa and James, inviting them to meet me at a local coffee shop to discuss their wedding situation. When they arrived, still looking shell-shocked from the previous day's revelations, I presented them with an unexpected proposition. I've spoken with the owner of Rosewood Manor, I explained, referring to a beautiful historic estate on the other side of town that legitimately operated as an event venue. They had a cancellation for your wedding date and are willing to accommodate your event at a discounted rate, given the circumstances. Melissa's eyes widened. But Rosewood is normally booked years in advance, and it's even more expensive than what we paid Victoria. The owner is an old friend of my grandfather's, I explained, and she was appalled by what Victoria did. She's offering the venue at cost, and I'm covering the difference between what you already paid and the actual fee. James looked suspicious. Why would you do that for us? We're strangers. Because you're innocent victims in this situation? I replied honestly. And because I have a proposal that might benefit both of us. I slid a folder across the table. Inside is documentation of Victoria's fraudulent heritage program. You're not the first victim she's been collecting. Fees for unauthorized use of several properties around town, including the old Miller farm and the Richardson estate. Melissa leafed through the documents, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. She told us your property was part of a town-approved program. We even checked the Heritage Association website, which listed your estate as an official venue. A website she created and controlled, I confirmed. The association exists, but its authority over properties is completely fabricated. What I'm proposing is this. I will ensure your wedding happens at Rosewood Manor, covering any additional costs. In exchange, I'd like your permission to set a rather elaborate trap for Victoria Cunningham, one that includes your wedding day, but not in the way she expects." James leaned forward, interested despite himself. "What kind of trap?" "That will permanently end her fraudulent scheme and her hold over this town," I promised, "and give you a wedding story you'll be telling for decades." After hearing my full plan, Melissa and James exchanged a look before breaking into matching grins. "We're in," James declared. "Victoria's face when this all comes together will be worth any inconvenience." With the couple's enthusiastic participation secured, I moved to the next phase of my plan. I contacted Parker's Demolition and arranged for equipment to be delivered to my property the day before the scheduled wedding. Then, I called Frank Spencer at the local newspaper, an investigative reporter who had previously tangled with Victoria over questionable HOA financial practices. Finally, I reached out to everyone who had been victimized by Victoria's heritage scheme, inviting them to a special demonstration at my property. The day before the wedding dawned bright and clear. By 8 in the morning, my driveway was crowded with vehicles, delivery trucks from Parker's Demolition unloading a small bulldozer and excavation equipment, workers placing orange construction barriers around my property, and a portable office trailer being positioned prominently near the entrance. Large signs reading, "Property renovation in progress, no trespassing," were erected along the perimeter. As expected, it took less than an hour for Victoria Cunningham to arrive, her Mercedes screeching to a halt behind the demolition truck. She emerged looking nothing like the polished community leader of our previous encounters, her silver hair disheveled, her expression a mixture of shock and fury as she surveyed the construction equipment dotting my carefully maintained gardens. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, marching toward me with fists clenched at her sides. "You can't possibly be doing construction now. The Wilkins-Peterson wedding is tomorrow." I looked up from my clipboard with an expression of mild surprise. "Good morning, Victoria. I'm just overseeing some long-planned renovations to my property. Complete landscaping overhaul, new irrigation system, koi pond where the gazebo stands now. Should take about 3 weeks to complete." Victoria's face paled as the implications sank in. "This is deliberate sabotage. You know perfectly well that wedding is scheduled for tomorrow. 150 guests are expected. The tent company is delivering this afternoon." "Ah yes, the wedding you arranged by forging my signature and trespassing on my property," I replied calmly. "I believe Officer Mitchell and the district attorney's office are still reviewing those criminal charges. But since I never authorized any wedding here, I'm free to renovate my private property whenever I choose." Victoria's composure disintegrated completely. "You cannot do this. Do you have any idea who I am in this community, the connections I have? I'll make sure you regret this obstruction for years to come." "Is that a threat, Victoria?" I asked, noticing with satisfaction that several neighbors had emerged from their homes to watch the unfolding drama. "Because I believe making threats while already facing potential criminal charges isn't generally considered wise." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "Name your price. Whatever you want. Just stop this ridiculous display and allow the wedding to proceed as planned." I pretended to consider her offer, then slowly shook my head. "I don't think you understand the situation, Victoria. This isn't a negotiation. It's a demonstration of consequences. You thought you could take control of my property through fraud and manipulation. You were wrong." Our confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Melissa and James, who emerged from their SUV looking appropriately distressed as they took in the construction equipment and barriers. Victoria immediately rushed to them, practically dragging them toward me. "Look what he's doing! After all our careful planning," Melissa burst into theatrical tears. "Our wedding is tomorrow. Where will our guests go? What about our deposits? My family is flying in from California today." I maintained my calm demeanor, though it was difficult not to smile at Melissa's perfect performance. "As I explained to Miss Cunningham, this is my private property. I never authorized its use for your wedding. Any agreements you made were with her, not with me." James put his arm around his sobbing fiancée, glaring at Victoria. "You promised us everything was legally arranged. You showed us permits and contracts." "Don't worry," Victoria assured them desperately. "We can fix this. Mr. Harrington is being unreasonable, but surely we can come to some arrangement." She turned back to me. $10,000. Cash. To postpone your renovations by 2 days. That's more than fair." Before I could respond, another vehicle pulled into my increasingly crowded driveway. Frank Spencer from the Meadowbrook Gazette, right on schedule. He approached with a notebook in hand and a photographer trailing behind him. Mr. Harrington, I got your message about a possible story. Something about fraudulent wedding venues and HOA overreach? Victoria's face drained of color as she recognized the reporter. This is a private matter, Frank. There's no story here. Frank smiled thinly. That's not what I'm hearing, Victoria. In fact, I've been conducting interviews with several property owners who claim you collected fees for unauthorized use of their land through a fictitious heritage program. He turned to me. And now I understand you're facing similar issues with a wedding supposedly scheduled on your property tomorrow? Over the next hour, more vehicles arrived, the owners of the other properties Victoria had included in her fraudulent program, all eager to share their stories with Frank. The photographer captured images of the construction equipment, the distressed couple, and Victoria's increasingly frantic attempts to regain control of the situation. By noon, a sizable crowd had gathered, including several members of the HOA board, who appeared deeply concerned by the unfolding scandal. Victoria made one last desperate play, addressing the assembled crowd. This is all a misunderstanding. The Heritage Association has always operated with the community's best interests at heart. Our Historic Venues program preserves Meadowbrook's character while generating maintenance funds for significant properties. And where have those funds been going, Victoria? Called Margaret Richardson, one of the property owners Victoria had defrauded. Because we certainly haven't received any maintenance money for the unauthorized tours you've been running through our rose gardens. As Victoria attempted to defend herself against the growing chorus of accusations, I quietly pulled Melissa and James aside. Everything proceeding as planned at Rosewood Manor, I asked. Melissa nodded, dropping her distressed bride act for a moment. All set for tomorrow. The florist is thrilled with the new location, and our guests have been notified of the venue change. We've been telling everyone it's because of unforeseen restoration work at the original location. Perfect, I replied. I think it's time for the final act. I approached Victoria, who was now surrounded by angry neighbors and suspicious HOA board members. I have a proposition for you, Victoria, I announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. I'll allow the Wilkins-Peterson wedding to proceed on my property as scheduled, under one condition. Hope flickered across her face. Name it, a full public accounting of all funds collected through your heritage program over the past 3 years. Every dollar traced to its source and its ultimate destination. Complete transparency, verified by an independent auditor. The color drained from Victoria's face again. That's impossible on such short notice. The records would take weeks to compile. Then I guess my renovations will proceed as planned, I replied with a shrug. The bulldozer starts work at the gazebo tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. Board member Richard Tennant stepped forward, his expression grave. Actually, Victoria, as HOA treasurer, I'd be very interested in seeing those financial records immediately, especially since the association's accounts show no record of any heritage program income. Victoria's gaze darted around the crowd, searching for allies and finding none. Her carefully constructed facade of authority was crumbling before our eyes. With a final glare in my direction, she turned and stalked to her Mercedes, speeding away in a spray of gravel. Frank Spencer approached me, grinning broadly. That was quite a performance, Daniel. This story will run on tomorrow's front page. Care to comment officially? I told him everything. The forged contracts, the unauthorized access to my property, the fraudulent fees collected from multiple homeowners. When he asked about the wedding, I smiled enigmatically. Let's just say the happy couple will still have their special day, though not in the way Victoria Cunningham planned. The next morning, the day of the wedding, my property looked dramatically different. The construction equipment remained, but had been rearranged to form a path leading to a small stage I'd had erected overnight near the gazebo. Chairs were set up facing the stage, and a podium stood center stage with a microphone. Signs directing guests to Wilkins-Peterson wedding venue information lined my driveway. At precisely 10 o'clock, the scheduled arrival time on the wedding invitations, luxury cars began pulling into my driveway. Confused guests in formal attire were directed to the seating area by Henry Wilson and several other neighbors who had enthusiastically joined my plan. As the seats filled, I stepped onto the stage and approached the microphone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daniel Harrington, the owner of this property. I want to thank you for coming today, though I'm afraid there's been a significant change of plans. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I continued. The wedding of Melissa Wilkins and James Peterson will indeed take place today, but not here. I explained the situation: Victoria's fraudulent scheme, the forged contracts, the unauthorized use of my property. The happy couple are innocent victims in this situation, as are all of you who traveled to be here today. That's why I've arranged transportation to the actual wedding venue, Rosewood Manor, where Melissa and James will be married at noon. On cue, 3 luxury coaches pulled into my driveway, ready to transport the guests to Rosewood Manor. But before dismissing them, I had one final announcement. In lieu of traditional wedding favors, Melissa and James have asked me to share with each of you a copy of today's Meadowbrook Gazette. You'll find it particularly illuminating reading during your short journey to the real venue. Helpers distributed the newspapers, whose front page headline read, "HOA President Charged with Fraud and Forgery in Heritage Venue Scheme." Below was a photo of Victoria Cunningham looking decidedly unpresidential as she faced the crowd of angry neighbors on my property. As the buses departed with the wedding guests, each clutching their newspapers, I noticed a familiar silver Mercedes slowly driving past my property, Victoria Cunningham visible behind the wheel. She pulled over briefly, staring at the buses and the newspaper headline visible through their windows. Our eyes met across the distance, and I raised my hand in a small wave before she accelerated away. The aftermath was everything I could have hoped for. Victoria Cunningham resigned as HOA president the following day, citing personal reasons. The district attorney filed formal charges for forgery, fraud, and trespassing, resulting in a substantial fine and 2 years probation. An audit of the Heritage Association's finances revealed that over $100,000 in venue fees had been diverted to Victoria's personal accounts over 3 years, leading to additional charges of embezzlement and a civil lawsuit from the HOA. Melissa and James had their wedding at Rosewood Manor, which went off without a hitch. They sent me a thank you note afterwards with a bottle of champagne and a wedding photo, writing, "Thanks for giving us the best wedding story ever. Our guests are still talking about the Venice scandal and how it was resolved." 6 months later, I hosted a garden party on my fully restored property, inviting neighbors and community members to enjoy the grounds my grandfather had so lovingly created. The HOA, now under new leadership with transparent policies and limited authority, had formally acknowledged my property's independent status. Several of Victoria's other victims had become good friends, united by our shared experience and determination to prevent similar abuses of power. Henry Wilson sat beside me on the gazebo steps as we watched children playing on the lawn and adults mingling among the gardens. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Not just of how you restored the property, but of how you stood up to Victoria. Thomas always said the best way to deal with bullies was to expose them to the light of day." I smiled, thinking of the newspaper headline that had so perfectly captured Victoria's downfall. The demolition equipment was a nice touch, wasn't it? Sometimes you have to tear things down before you can build something better. Henry chuckled, his eyes twinkling with the same mischief that had helped inspire my plan. "Indeed. And the new community we're building from the rubble of Victoria's reign is something worth celebrating." I raised my glass to join his toast, gazing out over the property that remained, as my grandfather had intended, a place of beauty and integrity, firmly under Harrington control for generations to come.